All right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is episode 308 for the week of September 17th. Actually, for the week of September 10th. We are recording this on September 17th. So if you're joining us live, thank you. It's always great to have you here. If you were here for the intro music, then like me, you are probably ready for your 1980s beach montage training. So if you are just joining in, I encourage you to go back and motivate yourself with some of that great beats at the beginning here. But joining us on this montage of games and game experiences and news for the past week, I have both of my co-hosts here joining me tonight. Tau Master 99. Tau, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. I'm glad. Glad to see you nodding along with my beach montage joke there as well. So thank you. That's always a good way to boost my ego. So
Some of the
appreciate it.
news stories we can probably do a montage of later on.
Yeah, certainly we
A
probably
lot of
could
announcements.
put some of those together. We had both a Nintendo Direct this week and a Sony State of Play, along with some other industry news and announcements and a little bit of saber rattling and controversy as well. Game Logic, I'm sure you're going to have some opinions as we head into the Unity piece, but how's your week going, sir?
Good. It was kind of an overall. It was kind of a slow news week.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
like the big story sucked all the air out of the room, and then there was kind of wasn't that much else.
yeah, I would think much to Unity's chagrin that there wasn't anything else kind of taking the headlines. We get a little bit of news of the rivals of Atheum Studio laying off half of their workers, but other than that, not a whole lot else. But we'll have plenty to talk about here on our episode. We've got some our top of the hour gaming stories, our game experiences, things we've been playing heavily this week. Then we'll run through some news headlines, including things that we just alluded to, and wrap it up with any other games that we significant or that made an impact on us over the course of this week. So, in true fashion, we are still in September, so it is a Starfield September. So, both Game Logic and Tao, you've been playing a little more Starfield. We've had some good conversation about this over the past few weeks. Game Logic, how are you feeling about the game at this point? You've sunk some more hours into it. You've had, some hit and misses with it, some questions, some reservations, but some enjoyment as well. So where are you living with it right now?
I mean, I don't. I mean, I don't feel like I've really had hits and misses like with the game, personally. It's just my normal kind of approach to chop things up into like three blocks, right? How does it affect me? How do I anticipate it's gonna hit other gamers in the market, and then does it move the needle for the company and for the business and for the industry, based on the company's strategy, and then does it evolve the design of games forward. And this is definitely like a game logic kind of game, right? Um, the problem with that for the rest of the market is I mean, anything that's a game logic kind of game probably inherently means that it's not for everyone else, right? Or at least it's not for some chunk of people. Um, I've had a good time with the game, but I think the most significant thing for me that the game has done, quite honestly, is it has rekindled in me the desire to get back to games that I enjoy with the grind loop, right? That are focused on progression and not necessarily story, that are heavily activity and systems based. And so that has led me into some of the games that I'm playing. That I'm going to talk about later on tonight. I've definitely the whole time been thinking, man, I really need to reinstall Star Citizen. I really need to reinstall Elite Dangerous. And that, while I say it's a game logic kind of game that has definitely caught my attention, that also is kind of an indicator of what the horizon of that attention is, right? That as I've commented before, while I really like the potpourri and the spaghetti that this is of like all of the different metas and subsystems and game elements that it's brought in, for any one of those metas, any one of those subsystems, any one of those mini games, I can always immediately and very easily reach for and think of a game that does that thing better. And so, I think I think this is a good game. I think it lands, making its mark on the landscape. I think in the long haul, I think in 10 years, just like Skyrim, we'll be talking about how amazing this game has been over its life cycle and all the experiences it's given us. Um, but but what sticks in my mind, right, are the things that I mentioned, right, the other games it makes me think of, but also like, and not in terms of a huge number, but the small things I think that are really super critical that it misses. And one of those is just, there's just not a lot of range in the emotion of the voice acting in the characterizations, and in the way that they provide an emotional hook into the story, right? I'm trying to think of how to say things. I mean, I think it's well known that Sarah is a romance option in the game, um, and I have taken that option quite far, right? But despite the extent to which I've taken that, I feel none of the emotional attachment. Like, she's a very deadpan character. Like, she's just not. I mean, she's very British, and I mean, maybe that's what it's supposed to be, but but while the facial, while the articulation of the facial features are there in a lot of the characters, that articulation very often exceeds the range of the voice acting. And so whether or not, Sarah is, super angry with you, or super, compassionate and emotional and involved with you, which also, I mean, I've been having conversations this week about how, there are people who say that the game has no bugs or the game is very light on bugs, and I'm like, I'm sorry, but that's partially your inability to recognize a software defect when you see one, right? Um, I mean, and one of those is in the characterization of Sarah, like, she whiplashes like within the span of seconds, like, being like, oh my God, I have these feelings for you, and then 30 seconds later she's telling you your behavior is not in keeping with the standards of Constellation, and you can't be doing this, right? And and there have been situations where some of that kind of peaks, and I do things to recover from it, right? Like from her being irritated at me, and then the next session I go in, and she opens with, she's has these feelings for me, and then like 10 seconds later she's right back to still being irritated. I'm like, I thought we fixed this. Like, what's going on? So, so that's a thing, and the thing it was causing me to think about tonight while I was prepping for the show is we go back to God of War Ragnarok, and we go back to The Last of Us, not The Last of Us 2, but the original The Last of Us. And as parents, right, we said on this show, across those two games, you guys talked about, you and Swiss talked about how God of War Ragnarok, you had this emotional attachment to it because of, having sons and, seeing the things that they were going through. And I commented that, well, God of War Ragnarok didn't really hook me as much as, say, The Last of Us, because, I have daughters, and so, that resonates more with me. But the point is that both of us had, all of us had emotional attachments to that.
Right. There's an emotional response to that characterization, where what you're describing is you don't have that same emotional connection, right? There's character development, but not in a way that has pulled you in emotionally.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's not. I mean, and I don't think that's my fault, right? I mean, I think that's the sauce that the game has in it. But like I said, from a mechanical and a systems based, I'm super impressed, and I'm super interested in it. And you guys know from my discussions of Diablo 2 and Far Cry and all these other things. Like, I love the inventory meta. I mean, you could, as you would guess, I love the ship configuration meta, and all of those things. But all of those things cause me to say, very game logic kind of game. I love that stuff. But when we talk about, is this game of the year material? Is it the same thing that Skyrim was at the end of its 10-year life cycle, right? And it's just not that. I think it will be, right, in 10 years from now, but it's just not there today.
Okay, Tao, you've been playing it as well. Where do you land on that emotional attachment to the characters, or are you, in true Tao fashion, more interested and enjoying the, the what are your stations where you're crafting and mining resources, kind of lost in the open world piece and less concerned about the emotional connection or the characterization?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that. I've seen that a lot around just forums and stuff and Discord servers. Where people are like, "Well, I mean, yeah, it's a good game." Kind of basically what Game Logic was saying. I can. It kind of ebbs and flows in this game where it's like some of the voice acting and just in voice acting in general is like like it was kind of spot on. Other time it's just kind of like the person was just showed up for a paycheck and they're just kind of throwing their lines out there. And then other times there has been some times where I see that emotion, but even though yeah you do get some of the like graphical movements of their face and stuff like that, but it just doesn't seem quite right. Like if it's that uncanny valley type of thing, and not that this is I mean the game looks great obviously, but it's not so much that it looks so real. You know that it's disconcerting. It's just there's something off, like when they're talking and you see their face and stuff like that's going on. And there's other times where it kind of clicks. So I think I think it just kind of depends, which is kind of weird. Like you would figure they try to do it uniform across the board, but I mean, I guess that's kind of hard. But there's 100,000 or 200,000 lines of dialogue, I think, in this game. So try to get everybody to show that real emotion, and get it out there might be kind of hard, I suppose. Obviously it's like a minor character. Maybe that's where you kind of see the drop off. But even some of the faction quests that I've done. Not I haven't finished all of them, but a couple of I've done. You kind of see the where it's just kind of like okay, kind of like deadpan, or they're kind of just monotonous. They're just kind of that kind of Bueller voice the whole way through their monologue or whatever they're saying. So it's just kind of weird. But for me personally, I mean, I'm more interested in exploring and the crafting and just picking up. I don't pick up everything. I learned my lesson in Skyrim and Fallout. Even though in Fallout, I think you could actually like use everything. You can if I remember correctly, it was for the crafting in that game. Here you can't. It kind of goes back to the Skyrim where you can't use everything in this game. Excuse me. That you pick up. There's obviously all kinds of tons of stuff you can pick up, but there's only certain things you can use for crafting, and it tells you like when you're looking at it like what can be used for crafting or not. So I've stopped picking up everything and just kind of focus on that stuff. Unless it's a gun or a piece of armor that's like high quality, or it's going to give me a good amount of money when I go to sell it. That's really all I care about right now. So, but I'm enjoying the storylines. I think there's some pretty cool, quests that I've done so far. Excuse me, even off the main quests. Like this is a side quest, so hopefully it's not a spoiler. But I have to become an assistant for this, Mars mining company, the boss of the company, because the operations guy wants this equipment order to go through, and I guess I don't know if he's been ignoring it or if he just hasn't done anything with it, or he keeps denying or whatever it is. So the current assistant left, so you have to become the assistant, and there's a bunch of stuff you got to do. But I thought that was kind of cool. It was like something different. I mean, still kind of a little bit,
So
you have to go.
are you talking about the Ryujin?
No, this is on Mars, not on
Okay.
Neon. Yeah,
Okay, gotcha.
I see when I go through these games, and like this is a game where you can kind of be good and kind of be bad if you want. And the Ryujin, it was creeping into that kind of bad territory. I was like, I got to set up somebody, and I got to take people out. I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like, I'm always kind of on the good path when I play through these games, at least the initial playthrough. And then sometimes when I go back, if I play it again, which it seems like this is a pretty good, there's pretty good replayability in this game. Like if you do, fly through the campaign. But I'm just taking my time now. I'm just kind of, doing what I got. And I know there's certain things that happen later on in the story that, gives you certain stuff, but, I'm just going to take my time and, do my Bethesda Skyrim, there's a quest here, there's a quest there, and kind of flip back and forth between them all. So,
I mean, the one bad and one good that I'll platform off of what Tao was saying. So where Tao was talking about, going back to what I said about like the facial animations versus the voice acting, I actually feel the opposite way in terms of part of my part of the reason the negative of the Sarah thing sticks with me so much is because she's she's with you like the whole time. Like this is your companion throughout the whole game, and I feel like the voice acting is one of the ones that gave me like the least sense of emotional attachment. But an example of like where I felt like the small parts that I was like, this was an opportunity for the person to really ham it up and really show like a lot of emotional range. But if you've so in that Ryujin, so you did part of that Ryujin side branch, right? Did you do the coffee mission? Did you go get the coffee for Imogen or whatever?
Yeah, I believe so. I think that was one of the first ones you had to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a point where when you go to get this coffee, you meet a character who is very emotional, and so when you look at the facial animations, like they are livid. I mean, and it's impressive. Like their face goes through that entire range of emotion. Their voice acting does not pair with that range of emotion like whatsoever. Like this is a person who should be yelling and screaming at you, like spitting, like frothing at the mouth, and like it's just like it just doesn't come across. So like it's so it's like I see it, but I don't hear it, and there's a disconnect. But one of the things the good I will say is like I've been talking about for the last few weeks, if you come to this game with the right kind of cultural intelligence, having been exposed to so many things, right? There's a lot of freelancer here from a past video game perspective, but from a sci-fi like genre stuff. Well, again, there's freelancer here in terms of like there's a character you will meet that will utter like the exact same dialogue that you hear in freelancer in certain situations like 50% of the time. Like there's a character type in freelancer that you meet that has like the same script, like you get very accustomed, you could probably repeat it back verbatim, and you meet another character in this game that does that. There is if you're a big Star Trek fan, and Star Trek the motion picture is like one of the least favorite films even among Star Trek fans. I personally like it because I actually think that film is much closer to what the original series was than a lot of the whiz bang starship battle stuff that people
right. It's because it started as a longer series script before it became a movie. Yep.
Yeah. So if you've watched Star Trek the motion picture and you remember it, which a lot of people don't, it's been a long time. I watched it dozens of times. There's a mission in the game that is like you're reading it, and you're like, holy crap, this is Star Trek the motion picture. There's Star Trek the Next Generation littered throughout this game. You get exposed to that. There's Dune. There's all these sci-fi stuff series. There's Aliens. There's all these things you get exposed to that if you have this fabric, like you get so much more out of the game, and that part of the game is like very appealing.
So, gentlemen, any stories in terms of your experiences this week? Things you want to highlight? Or I appreciate this dialogue, right? As someone who has not dipped into Starfield, again, the ability to kind of appreciate what it can do, but where it struggles is something that all games, right? There's very rarely is there a game that hits all the highs without ever dipping into a low or struggling in some capacity. So I think what you said at the beginning, Game Logic, in terms of, it's a Game Logic game, right? Like knowing what you're going in for the experience and what you're going to be able to get out of it and where its limitations are still allow you to enjoy your time, even if it's not as complete as you were hoping for.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm actually hitting spots now where it's getting really difficult for myself and just my character, just the level I'm at. So I've had to, and that would. So originally, I was just going to kind of bounce between mostly just the campaign and maybe like a faction or two side quests. But then, like I said, it's starting to get hard, and there's just been at least one time where I think I was doing the use, or I think it's the Vanguard, and I think it's the UC Vanguard quest line. And I was getting near the end, and I literally, in this one section, without giving anything away, battling these creatures, I got down to like my last gun with barely any ammo left. So, and then I remembered I forgot I had grenades, which I always forget about, grenades and mines. So I was just tossing those out like crazy, and finally I was able to beat the creature I was going against. So, and then just been space battles too, where either took me a really long time to get past it, or I just couldn't beat it. Like I think I mentioned that last week, where there was an end of a one quest that I just couldn't beat. So I've kind of just I'm doing other quests now, just kind of beef up myself, and I have to go into the ship. I still haven't modified my ship other than a couple little things they had to do for that quest that you just add, you just tack it on to your existing ship, so it wasn't a big deal. But I haven't upgraded anything or switched out parts or done anything like that. So, and then there's still outpost stuff that I haven't even tried to do yet. So there's a lot of stuff I have to do still, and I think I'm starting to see now that I might have to start doing that stuff so I can start beefing myself up a little bit. So that's where I'm at right now.
I don't want to go into a ton of detail on like stories because that'll start giving stuff away. What I will say is I think what I'd highly encourage people to do is so first of all, what I would say is this whole thing about, well, you should mainline the campaign or you should play side missions. My personal feeling is the media and the reviewers have done an injustice, right? Trying to tell people how to play the game. The best advice I feel I can give is play the game however you want. Like, don't get hung up and wrapped around the axle, because there's absolutely no guarantee that playing the mainline campaign is going to give you the greatest amount of satisfaction. There's no guarantee that playing side missions is going to give you the greatest satisfaction. I wouldn't also. I see a lot of people who are like, I'm doing this faction like mission, or I actually kind of see people saying, "Hey, I saw this person like in this mission. Like, how do you start that branch, right? Because I want to go down that branch." I would say just play the game. But what I would heavily encourage is, first of all, star hop, like system hop. Like when you're trying to get to a mission and it says you haven't gone through like all these star systems in between, so you can't make it on a single jump, don't divert, don't go do something that you can get to, go down that path. Because I've found the most rewarding tidbits to be when I've jumped into a system simply for star charting and then had something completely unplanned or unexpected like pop up when I'm there. There will be all sorts of pop up side missions that will happen as you're star hopping from system to system. The other thing I would say is when you are engaged in a mission, whether it's in Neon or other places, talk to characters. Like when you see characters that are named characters and they don't just say citizen, consider talking to them. Not every single time. Don't get bogged down trying to talk to every person, because that will just go bad. But when you walk into a space and you have a mission that says go get the thing, right? I would take some time to consider, maybe don't just go get the thing, right? Walk in there and see it, if there's the person that they told you to talk to that's there, that's great. But if there's another named person in the room or 2 or 3 other named people in the room that you weren't told anything about, consider talking to them, because sometimes that will open up completely different branches of side missions that no one's talking about because no one knows, and in that lore just isn't out there. But it will flower out the lore. You will come upon explanations. Go down dialogue trees and paths. Sarah reveals a lot of things about her past that aren't really in the zeitgeist now because people haven't gone down that path and don't know about them. It will also trigger side missions in some cases. So just. It's an open world. Like play it like it's open. Is what I would say.
Yeah, that's sound advice. Yes. So let's move from one open world to another one. This one set a little closer to home, set over in Hawaii. So the Crew Motorfest launched this week, launched on Friday, Thursday, depending on how much you spent. You probably had a couple of hours and days of early access. It also is available for a 5-hour trial. And so that's where I have been spending some of my time with the Crew Motorfest on PlayStation 5, running at 60 frames per second in performance mode. Looks great in HDR. Just beautiful space, right? It's Hawaii, so you get real nice space. It looks a little improved from where it was in the beta a few months ago. So I was in the closed beta at one point in time. We talked about it here on the show in terms of some of the different varieties of activities. Those are all still here. You've got your kind of street racing, neon lit up, nitro boosted Tokyo Drift like circuit. You have your rally racing, your off-road aspects, and then you have kind of your closed circuit lap based, which is both kind of almost Formula One cars, but also kind of a variety of more mainline racing with pits and everything else. And then those are the 3 that were in the beta. Since then, there's a playlist around the American muscle car, so street racing with a variety of muscle cars. And there's also one that I haven't had a chance to dive into yet. This was a new one. It's called like spinning donuts or something. So I'm not sure exactly what that is, but that's another new playlist. And so the way that it's organized, very similar to the most recent Forza Horizon 5, is you choose a playlist to start with. You can hop in and out between different playlists. They'll give you a series of kind of mainline quest events within that playlist, but also side missions related, other races or speed. There's in the American muscle car one of the kind of side ones is a drag race where you have to, kind of manually shift between things and hit a certain speed within a certain time frame. So it really has a wide variety of activities. Again, it is the Crew, so it's got planes and boats in there somewhere. Like on the overhead map, you can kind of see you see some icons of that kind of drifting around. But unlike the Crew 2, it's not really the focus. It's there because probably this game engine was designed to have it. And so it was easy enough to put back in. But really, the focus is very tightly mirrors Horizon 4, Horizon 5 in terms of right down to the cheeky, friendly AI in your car that's giving you directions, and the host of the Motorfest, which is very much like a Horizon Fest, right? Like all of these things, if you have played 4 or 5 of Forza Horizon, there's not a whole lot here that feels new. I think what it does feel is really solid. I think that's it's not bad to have a game feel like another game that came out a few years ago, and there's not one like that coming out this year. So, and there's also not there's not a Forza Horizon on PlayStation. So, given the install base of PlayStation 5s, this opens up that type of racing to a whole lot of, people that may not find GT's racing their cup of tea, or Gran Turismo has been out a few years now, and so they may be looking for something different. Here, again, it's much more of an arcadey racer than it is a precision simulation racer, but you can take off or put on as many driving assists as you want. And even with that, it's still not going to be at your GT level, but it has the ability to be a solid racer. As an arcade racer, it's a whole lot of fun. Like it runs really smooth. It's a pretty landscape. Races are fun. It does. I remember talking about this in the beta time. Similar to Riders Republic, where it has kind of a battle royale aspect or some large multiplayer piece, where that was like the big downhill race with 60 people for Riders Republic. Here it is a big zoned in area of a demolition derby that you launch into it, and you even drop out of a plane, which is just kind of goofy as a car dropping down. But you get some power-ups that can either give you a shield or like make your impact with a car even stronger. And you've got a health bar that you knock out you're on a team, and your cars, if you get knocked out, you're out. And the zone closes in intervals, similar to a battle royale game. But it's kind of a fun. I mean, as somebody who enjoys demolition derbies and smashing up cars, it's a fun, never a different mode and a nice gameplay change. And that's, I think, one of the things that Motorfest provides really well is just a whole lot of options, similar to Forza Horizon, right? Like there's always something that you can be doing. There's a path that you can mainline if that's really what you want, but there's also it in both the Horizon way and also in an Ubisoft open world way. It throws a whole bunch up on your map and gives you the option to drive and discover things or set waypoints and kind of get to them to keep progressing as well. So yeah, as a racer, it's really sound. In some ways, this week was also the week when the preview coverage of Forza Motorsport was unembargoed, so we got some of that just the day before this launched with the Motorfest. So they are two different games in terms of simulation versus arcadey, and I think in some ways this game hopefully finds a place. It finds an audience. It's really well designed. I think the thing I appreciated both about the beta and what I love jumping into it over the course of the last few days is how good the physics feel. Like I love the idea of Crew 2, but spent more time in a plane and in a boat because I couldn't stand the car physics and it felt kind of either floaty, not having enough weight to it. But here it feels like the physics have changed. There's more weight to the vehicles. The vehicles feel different based on what you're driving. So they've definitely done some work under the hood per se to make the physics model a little more robust, a little more realistic, or at least a little more that differentiates it as you're racing. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's one of those where it may not be a game that I am going to sit down and play for hours every night, but it is certainly a game that I've found myself checking in on once a day. Drive around a little bit, do a race or two, suddenly find that I've lost a half hour to 45 minutes trying to just explore the area. So yeah, very enjoyable. I'll be curious to see what its numbers look like as it's coming out. And as we've talked about here on the show before, Ubisoft has been synonymous with kind of long-term development and support of games, the Crew 2 being a great example of that. So it's a game that while it's launching now, we can expect that it's going to be supported for the next few years and continue to provide content or new cars and new options as well. So I think, even Riders Republic was 2 years ago at this point, probably 21. And it's just getting a skateboarding expansion this fall later in September. Cow and I were just talking about that. So again, 2 years from now, who knows what expansions will be added to Motorfest, but it seems like it's a game with a lot of potential and a really sound foundation that has just enough. I mean, it's got plenty there to keep people busy.
So, when you're in the game, do you see the other players like in say Riders Republic, but you can't really like interact with them until you like do a mission, or is it you don't see anybody until you jump into a race?
So here you're seeing, it's almost like a ghost that you're seeing. You can't run through them, you can't run into them, you can't get sideswiped by them. You'll see them kind of like I'll be driving one way and see there must be some race going on because I'll see 6 cars come flying past me going the other direction.
Okay.
And then you also see just the AI cars just kind of slowly toddling along. So you can tell the difference. So it's a world where there is some shared space, but not necessarily kind of communal, right? So I don't quite know how they're approaching that, right? Like, what's the benefit of seeing other things race past, unless you're following somebody in terms of trying to find that. It does have multiplayer in terms of kind of partying up, and then you'd be in an instant space, or you'd be in that shared world together as well. All right. Well, not chances. I know I'm still going to be playing it a little bit over the next coming week, so hopefully I'll have some more detail to go into as well. But let's go into some detail with the news in terms of this week. We alluded to some things at the top of the hour. Talk about the big story, kind of sucking the air out of the room. So that big story, I think, is Unity's announcement about the fee charges that they're going to start in the beginning of January 24. So that they announced that they are charging cents per install. So this is for Unity Personal. This is a story out of gamesindustry.biz that for Unity Personal and Unity Plus users, thresholds of $200,000 in revenue or 200,000 lifetime installs. For Pro and Enterprise, so the different tiers, that's $1 million in revenue and $1 million in lifetime installs. And with that, then you have either a 20 cent per install or a 1 cent per every install above 2 million. So that was kind of the initial kind of volley that they let out there. And after a little bit of pushback, they came back with some more clarification a few days later in terms of that only the initial install will require the fee, not and not uninstalls and reinstalls. Right, there was some question in the idea of install bombing in terms of installing it, uninstalling it, doing it in succession to rack up charges for a developer. It will have installs. There will be charges on installs from a second device. So if you're installing it on one PC and then another, or a PC and then a Steam Deck, or two different multiple mobile devices, you'd get that as well. There were questions around how demos would work and how pricing on demos would work because it's not the full game. They've come out to clarify that demos would be exempt. Also, games that are given in charity bundles, like a Humble Bundle, would be exempt from this as well. And then there were conversations around what about subscription services and how would that work? And they clarified that the install fee would go toward the distributor and not the developer, so that in a Game Pass aspect that Microsoft would be paying that, in an Apple Arcade aspect that Apple would be paying that. So all that said, I think that there's more to unpack here, but these are kind of the highlight beats. I think one of the things that is missing in here, and correct me, gentlemen, if I'm wrong, but in the reading of it, in the reading analysis of it and opinions about it, in all of that, I don't see an explanation of how they're going to be doing that in terms of how they're tracking those installs. If that is a self-reported, if that is something that's going to be built into the code that's going to have to report back to Unity, if that is,
as
go
far
ahead.
as I understand, it's part of the endemic. When you roll a game in Unity, it's part of the telemetry or homing beacon that winds up being compiled into your game and distributed.
So there is something kind of pinging back to Unity in terms of that.
I think so, and I don't think that's unusual. I think that's like it almost every game to some extent, whether or not the developer puts it there or the platform requires it, whether the iOS requires it. I mean, there's telemetry and observability is just a thing that is common now, and I mean there's upside to that. Maybe not for nefarious uses like this, but for instance, at GDC a few years ago when the information came out that I can't remember his name, but the guy who heads the studio, that made It Takes Two and some of the other stuff, and I think he did a joint presentation with maybe a Microsoft developer, and they were saying, from or else maybe he made a comment about a presentation from two Microsoft developers, and it was the whole thing about we know from telemetry and observability that most gamers don't replay games, right? And Joseph Fares, and he made a very big issue about there's all this emphasis in the industry about game replayability, and here's this data that shows like most gamers, if you talk about the whole market, actually don't replay a lot of their games. So my point is just it's there's good that comes out of telemetry in terms of informing developers in the market, what people are interested in and what people want, so that they don't keep spending resources making things people don't.
So
but then
let me ask from
things like this.
From an ignorant perspective, if that is built into Unity, then there would have to be an additional layer that would switch it for when it's a demo or when it is part of a bundle, or like something that the developer is going to have to make a choice in terms of how that either is coded or designated to be able to hit those different marks. Now that they're being more granular about it, it seems to raise even more questions.
I mean, maybe. I mean, what I would think more so is that it is part of the SDK that gets implemented and rolled into your game, and that it is black box, so a developer can't see inside it, can't access it. And so Unity will make updates and revisions to that, right, to have telemetry on what they want to observe. But I mean, my suspicion is that the developer won't have to do anything to, like, you know, arm the Amanda Walder, time bomb in your head, so to speak. But by the same token, Unity wouldn't want to give them access to it because they wouldn't want them to be able to, turn it off or manipulate it somehow.
So, we've talked in terms of kind of the details here. Game logic from a developer perspective. Thoughts on this? Like, I part of this feels like I can see from a business side, like, why they're trying to do this, right? They're trying to, with all the installs, with all the microtransactions that happen with games that are running their engine, I can see the boardroom logic of trying to get a cut of that in terms of the monetization. How that's done, what that does to developers, and I think another piece of this is to what percentage, and I haven't seen these numbers, right? To what percentage of Unity's kind of portfolio and their revenue are smaller game developers or even game developers themselves, right? Unity has been trying to work toward kind of enterprise aspects. And so if it's being done at an enterprise level, it's sure a lot easier to figure out how many installs you have because you've sold those number of seats. Where on a game development side, it's a much more squishy aspect. So part of me wonders, like, to what degree they're worried about losing X percentage of small developers that only make up a smaller percentage of them, or is this a boardroom decision based on profit margins and growth projections that is less about the software itself and more about the stock dividends. So I'm kind of curious on your thoughts there, both in terms from a development end, but also from kind of where that you see this playing out.
Well, let me start by saying it's tough to say, and I don't know where I've landed on it just yet. So I think part of the reality of the landscape is there are, so there's a portion of Unity. Borbor Country is in the chat. So hey, Borbor, thanks a lot for stopping by.
Thanks for joining us.
Part of Unity, part of the users of Unity are bigs, right? So EA has a mobile division. A lot of their developers use Unity. So bigs who have a strong play in mobile, who use Unity, I don't think that they're going to be affected because they've got 9 ways to Sunday to slice and dice this and bury the costs and pass them on to consumers, and consumers just won't be aware because it won't be in their face and in their windshield. I think at the low end, I think is kind of what you were alluding to, right? There are developers who, like, their numbers will never cross this line, so they won't necessarily, like, be impacted. I don't want to. I'm not throwing shade at anybody's political beliefs. I'm leaning on this as an analogy. But the whole, like, we're going to make Microsoft pay for the Game Pass installs sounds very much like Trump saying he's going to make Mexico pay for the wall, right? I don't know. And I'm not saying Trump couldn't have made Mexico pay for the wall. I just never understood how, right? You were going to tell a sovereign nation that they were going to pay on pay for a resource for you. It's the same way. Like, I don't know how. I don't get how Unity is going to tell Microsoft, who's a much bigger player in the industry and has much more muscle. And it's just incredibly, I mean, if you go outside the gaming industry, now you're talking about trying to tell a multi-trillion-dollar company, right, what they're going to do. A multi-trillion company that, like, literally had its hand in building Silicon Valley. So, I mean, so the question becomes, who are these people who are caught in the middle? My personal feeling, I'm reading a lot into this and a lot of, psychoanalysis of John Riccitiello and, like, what he's thinking. And
right. So John Riccitiello, CEO of Unity, former CEO of EA as well.
Yep, captain of the ship when, or at least very high in the leadership during times of, like, we're only going to make multiplayer games and microtransactions and all this kind of stuff that, I mean, EA, and EA has earned a stronger reputation, right? After, remember EA in the years, I mean, Captain of the Ship when EA was getting its votes as worst
Right,
company
worst
on the
company
planet.
to work for. It was a $10,
Yeah.
Project $10 initiative in terms of online play, things like that. Yep.
So you go back a few months ago, and Richard Sella made his comment that basically alluded to if mobile game developers weren't doing the things that they needed to make money, then they were fools, and he walked that back. But my belief is that part of this is about not just unity, quite honestly. I'm not saying that part of this is about like anything that's altruistic, right? This is a very coldly calculated, financial market assessment that I think Riccitello is making. I think Riccitello just feels that there's more money in mobile gaming and everyone should be making more. And part of the problem is that there's a strata of mobile game developers who aren't charging the money that they should be charging. And I think part of this is him kicking the hornet's nest to say, you guys should be charging more money, right? You think about, and the other thing I was going to mention, right, is also, it's also going to depend on where people are deploying their games, right? On iOS, you deploy your game and people have a higher tendency to pay for your application than when you deploy it on Android. And so, but I think he's looking at things like mobile game developers who put their games on Android that are free to play, that there's too much of giving stuff away from his perspective.
Right, like that idea of you're leaving money on the table. Not necessarily that they're pricing it incorrectly based on what the developer's philosophy is or, intent with it, but that from a business perspective, that there is money left, revenue out there that is not being harnessed.
Exactly. And I think he thinks Unity has been doing that to a certain extent, that they haven't been. And I mean, and again, I don't think it's a matter of solely of we should get paid more. I think it is literally there should be more overall revenue flowing into this marketplace and for all suppliers, and we need to do a thing to raise the floor from where spending is now, to keep this being a viable business model.
Tao, any thoughts on this?
I guess my only question is and I'm assuming probably not, but is there any other companies that do this kind of thing or something similar? Like I haven't really seen anybody mention that, or haven't seen anything, just kind of doing a quick search here and there, over the past few days when this had come out. Like I've never heard of something like this that you guys know of, where it's like an install based charge.
I'm not aware of how Unreal does their pricing structure, but I don't remember it having. I think part of the reason that this has garnered the headlines that it has is because of the install piece, which does feel like a new play here.
And that's another thing too. Like I haven't heard any other developers say anything, which might be the case too, where they're like, "Oh yeah, it's not a bad idea, so we want to do that maybe eventually." So that kind of thing. But like I said, I never heard it, this coming up before. So.
Well, this is part of my thing, and I'll pass the mic right back to you, topic. This is part of my, for example, of where I think Riccitello is looking at this and being like, we're leaving money on the table. So you think of all the free-to-play games, and you think about how often you or maybe others pulled out a game and install it, and it sits on your phone, and you never play it, right? And Riccitello is like, that's like the development's been done. Like the person got the SDK from us and did the work and created a product, and it's been given unto the hands of a consumer, but it's sitting there latent, not doing anything for anyone. Like, and I think he's got a perspective that's like, no, that's part of the grist in the mill, and that needs to be monetized and making us money. And by doing so, we're gonna stop people from pulling down games and not engaging with them, right? And I think to a certain extent, this is going to lead to some attrition, which I also think maybe he thinks isn't a bad thing, right? Maybe, on Steam, what is it, 10,000 games per year get made, lots of which are useless. And I think what he thinks is that this is going to drive, I think part of his thinking is there's no point in indies being in the space developing games that nobody's playing. And so he's fine if those things don't get made anymore, if it means fewer games are being made that are actually monetized and people are actually playing and using. Sorry.
No,
No,
I
don't
agree.
apologize. That's
Yeah.
I think that's from a Riccatello perspective, like that's a sound analysis of where they could be coming from as a company. Todd, what were you going to say?
No, I was just pretty much, yeah. Obviously.
I'm really curious to see how this develops. Like if this is really where they run with, or if this is the, similar to what was it last year when we had the Dungeons and Dragons Hasbro kind of change of license? Like, is this here's the worst case scenario, and now is this part of a negotiation process, right? Like, we're going to charge you something, we're going to change some things, but now that you've seen kind of the worst case, now when we come back with something that is still going to be beneficial to you, it's going to feel more moderate. So
Well, the things I was going to, so first, one thing I was going to mention is, so I think tonight they put out a tweet that said they're walking this back, at least in terms of they're pulling the policy off the table and doing exactly what you said, right? They're going back to retool it. And kind of the hidden thread in it is, oh, we're going to do something. we're not doing nothing, but we may not do exactly what we've said here.
Yeah, Borbor, that's a really good question. So Borbor in the chat brings up about piracy, right? Like if it's you've got the executable and you haven't paid for it, but you've downloaded it and it's connecting back to Unity, is that going to be like, how do they build that in? How do they identify that? Like Borbor's question is about any type of anti-piracy pieces there. And I think the industry has shown that that's a really difficult thing to do consistently and protect. And think that's where I've heard commentary on that as well, Borbor. Like, how do they not charge for those things? Because that is going to count as a download. And as we've seen with both high profile and small indies, that it's pretty easy for a game to get pirated pretty quickly after launch. So I think that's another question there, which goes back to what Game Logic just said of if they're pulling this back and coming back with something else, we'll see how some of that gets addressed.
So the couple other things I'll add is, last year I had an opportunity to kind of sit in on a few roundtables while I was doing some freelance work for VentureBeat, and one of the things that came up was how a lot of people who are very heavily involved in investment in the gaming industry, part of the philosophy that goes around is when the industry does things like this, people will get angry and then they'll forget about it and then we'll relabel it and repackage it and it'll come back around. Or even people will get angry and we'll just stop talking about it for a little bit and then life will go on and we'll do it anyway and people won't be bothered. So that's
that's not unique to the game industry, right? Like, right. An ideal to make money does not sit on the shelf forever. That it just comes around with a different label on it.
Right, and the other thing I'll add is obviously Unreal kind of tried to torpedo and take advantage of it, but it didn't. Their effort. For instance, when Twitter did its things where it started turning people off, we saw a lot of uptake of things, even though they eventually, like, Threads went hot for a while, then it eventually fell flat. But we did see a lot of exodus of a lot of users, right, from Twitter over to some of these things I can't remember, but Mastodon, obviously one of them, Blue Sky, obviously another one. There was one that it got strained at the seams because they just weren't expecting the influx of people, and that just kind of the air went out of that balloon. But we did see like an impact, right, and an uptake in other businesses that were offering alternatives to Twitter. Unreal did its thing, and what I'll say is I haven't heard like a loud volume of, oh yeah, we're flipping over to Unreal. That's it. Screw this. What I've basically heard is kind of what I said before, that I think some of the suppliers are going to get drained out of the industry and they're going to go get jobs with big publishers again, right, and just suck it up and walk off the indie beat. Because more than I've heard we're flipping over to Unreal, I've heard we're just pulling the game and we're just done with it.
Yeah, you've seen some of those announcements already from smaller things of like Cult of the Lamb saying buy it now because it's going away at the end of the year if this is the policy. So, well, gentlemen, let's turn from some maybe some a little more exciting news from the Unity story is we had 2 directs or state of plays. We have both Nintendo and then Sony both on Thursday of last week. So first off, let's go through with the Nintendo Direct. We don't have to hit all of these, but I think it's worth kind of calling out some highlights. First off, Tao, you have been playing one of the games that was announced there. So there was a rumor, a leak about there being some type of F-Zero game coming out, and they announced F-Zero 99 in the vein of Mario 99 or Tetris 99 in terms of an online kind of battle royale aspect around F-Zero. So you've played it a little bit. How's the game? How is it? What's its kind of premise, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so well, just first off, I don't think I played a lot of F-Zero originally back on the old systems. I might have rented it one time, and I was just like, okay, like it wasn't for me. But playing this new one, the F-Zero 99, I mean, it kind of reminds me like it's still like kind of super. I'd say like Super Nintendo-ish graphics, a little bit more polished maybe, and it's just just like it says, just like Tetris and Mario, there's 99 other players or 98 other players besides yourself. You start off, on this kind of a large track where actually all 99 people are like just in a line, like in a row. And then it kind of pairs down when you get to the actual track. And then, you just kind of, you drive in. There's no, I think another reason I didn't really get into it too much was because there's really no power ups or anything. Like there's some turbo boosts and you can do like a spin move, which I don't know if you could do that in the original game, where it kind of knocks players away from you if they're too close to you. I don't think that was in the original game. So I remember. I think that's probably something for this game.
Yeah, that wasn't. I don't remember that being there either.
Yeah. So and that's because you have a power meter. That's if you get hit or by another player, or if you hit like the side of the track, you lose some of that power. Then that power also is your turbo boost. So when you do the turbo boost, you're using that same power meter. So that goes down too. And obviously, once that gets all the way down, if you blow up, then you're out of the game. So. And then once you come around, around the track once, or when you're doing your laps, there's like a little pit area where you can kind of boost that back up. But like if you if you use that almost all of it or even half of it, like on the first map or two, you're not going to get all of it back just by going to that pit. You'll get a little bit back, maybe a third of it back if you're lucky, but you don't get all of it back. So you gotta use that sparingly. And then there's another I forgot what it's called in there, but so as people are hitting each other, or if you're hitting the side of the tracks, there's like these gold sparks that fly out at you, and you can pick those up if you're behind those people, and then that fills up a meter where once that's filled up, you get shot up. It's almost it's like this blue like road that appears like above the normal track, so you kind of get away from the regular people down there. So it's it's kind of a shortcut kind of a thing, I guess.
Right, but it also prevents some damage through the ramming aspects of things.
Yeah, so you can do that too, and I don't know if that's like automatic or what. Because there's times where I thought I triggered it, and then there's other times where it just happened all of a sudden. I was like, oh, okay, that's weird. So, but I mean, you're pretty much just racing the whole time. I played I think probably two different maps. I don't know how many maps there are altogether, but I did a couple races just with actual people. But the first 3 races you do are just against the AI. So just trying to get you acclimated to the racing style and what you can do in the races. You actually start off with 25, and then you go 50, and then you find like the last third race is 99. Still all AI people. So like, oh. I was excited because at first I didn't realize that, and I got first in all 3 of those maps, and then I realized on that last race I was like, oh, because you could see the little leaderboard at the end, it just says CPU next to each name. So I was like, I kind of figured because it was way too easy. So I only did a couple of races with actual people. I can't remember what the first one I placed in, but the second one was like 39th, I believe. So not too bad, top 50, and then you get points. That level you up, and then you can unlock like different stuff like wraps and stuff for your cars, and I think you can unlock different cars, and then there's something else, a banner for your just like your profile when you're looking at your name and stuff, and other people see your name. So there's unlocks. I think just like in Tetris, there's unlocks there too. So but it's pretty fun. I was enjoying it, so I'm definitely gonna kind of keep trying to play that one throughout the week.
Nice. Thanks for the rundown there. So also in the direct, we had a number of kind of deeper expansions on games that were announced over the summer. We got a name for the Princess Peach game, Princess Peach Showtime. Got some more scenes from that, more scenes from Luigi's Mansion HD, 2 HD, which is a remaster remake of the Dark Moon one on DS. We get some more info on Super Mario RPG, the new WarioWare game coming this fall. So we get a series of games and really kind of hitting month after month. We have kind of a steady beat of releases leading up until summer of 24, which seems appropriate given the rumors of the next Nintendo console coming later in 2024. So they've kind of laid out where they're going in terms of here. We got some announcements on some expansion pieces like the Splatoon expansion, which looks like almost a roguelike aspect to it. We got one new announcement related to Mario versus Donkey Kong and the One More Thing announcement of a Paper Mario Thousand Year Door remaster. So those are all the Nintendo ones, a number of smaller indie games that are out already or are coming out simultaneously on Steam and on Switch. Things like Wargroove 2, which is Advance Wars like, but in more of a fantasy setting. Dave the Diver is coming. Some more content for Among Us. We got Trombone Champ, which feels perfectly goofy for Switch. I think the one surprise announcement here that I am not surprisingly the most excited for is a new Contra game coming out by Way Forward, right? Given both my age and my nostalgia around Contra and Way Forward's good 2D platforming chops, and they were the ones who developed Contra 4 on the DS, which is a solid game. So Contra Operation Galga or Gulega or whatever, it'll probably change before then, but that's coming out in 2024. That's my kind of surprise excitement from from this direct. Gentlemen, anything that stood out to you as either a surprise, negative or positive, or something that you're really looking forward to here?
The Contra one, that's actually just a remake, right, of the very first game. If
I think
I thought,
they
right?
described it as kind of a remake, remaster, expansion
Reimagining?
aspect,
Okay.
reimagining. Yes,
Okay.
I think that is the word they use. So it
Yeah.
may hit some similar levels, but also it certainly looks to expand on some things.
Yeah, I was actually pretty excited about that one, and also, I guess kind of a surprise was the Tomb Raider remasters of the first three games, Tomb Raider 1, 2, 3. So that looks interesting, where you can kind of flip back and forth, between current graphics and then the old style polygon graphics. So it's kind of cool. A lot of I mean, a lot of games do that, but I just thought
Right.
kind of
It looks
neat.
nice. My question will
Yeah.
be, will it have kind of the tank controls
Yeah.
from first generation PlayStation games? So
Yeah. Other than that, the other kind of big surprise that for me at least was the Princess Peach game, which actually kind of looked pretty cool. Kind of Mario vein because you got the different costumes that you can change into and they have different abilities. So I was actually interested in that one. So that looks pretty cool. Other than that, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot that looked interesting to me, at least for me. There's a lot of like RPGs. I think Atlas had one or two games on there that they announced. It was kind of nice. There was like 3 or so games that were coming out that day of the direct or within like a day or so. So that was kind of nice that they kind of dropped some stuff. So good. It was neat overall. I think it was pretty good.
Game Logic, anything that stood out to you or things that were missing from it that you expected or hoped to see?
No, I mean, my hit list was Horizon Chase 2. I've been playing that on mobile, and so the sequel being out on Nintendo Switch, and that was one of the shadow drops of that day. Definitely perked my interest. War Tales, I think, is a good news story. I'm not personally interested in playing it on Switch, but I have been playing it on PC. So it's nice that once again we have a PC port go into the Nintendo Switch in the waning months of its life cycle. And pretty much concurrent or very near to it with the actual release date on PC because it hasn't been out on PC for that long. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown definitely has my interest. Nice January drop, so kind of harkening back to the Fire Emblem Engage drop in January of this year. I too was excited by the Tomb Raider 1 through 3 remaster. That's a nice thing to have, in portable format to take with you on travel and kind of while some of the time away. Also, super interested in the Contra game. Nice to see that it was a harken back to the old school. I think we've tried this reimagining of Contra in an effort to turn it into a completely different game than like a 2D side scroller, and that hasn't those efforts haven't caught fire. So it's nice with them just sticking with the tried and true formula and trying to iterate on that and then taking it back in time. That was, those were the only things I was interested in. The thing that caught my ear was while they did maybe talk about some games that were 2024, what they said in the direct that I caught was summer 2024. And that was, maybe I hyper focused on that, but that was the furthest out date with any specificity to it. And what that makes me feel like is I'm putting my finger on the calendar now for release date of the Switch 2 in September of 2024.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with you in the fall of a release. Luigi's Mansion is the summer 2024 one, which feels like a final send off, right? Like they definitely have their calendar where they've got March, Princess Peach, they've got some spring pieces, summer, and granted, it's also at a time when they probably wouldn't be announcing a whole lot of things for fall 2024, even if they existed. But between this direct and the direct back in the summer, definitely feel like it's kind of clearing out the decks, getting things ready for a launch of a new system. So yeah, I think whether that's a September release, whether that's a November release, like the Switch was, in terms of trying to hit closer to the holiday, some of that also feels like it may be dependent on what supply looks like in terms of how many units they can get out into the channel for whatever release date they end up trying to hit.
Well, the big tell for me is, and I know Luigi's Mansion is a remake, but at the end of the day, this is still a spooky game, right? Like why drop that game sometime way outside of the
Good
Halloween?
point, right? Why not save it then to the fall if you expect that you're still going to be pushing things on the original Switch? Yep. Well sussed out.
Yeah, there's one more. Battle Crush was the other one that looked pretty interesting. Kind of a battle royal brawler, kind of top down brawler that you can just like different characters with different abilities, and so that was pretty cool too. Which I believe is on PC also, or gonna be.
Yeah, it looked like it could also be a mobile one as well, depending on what it looks like. So later that same day, we end up with the Sony State of Play. And this one starts off with a little goofiness with Baby Steps, which is that kind of co-op walking game, which we've seen before. We now know that Roblox is coming to PlayStation 4 and not PlayStation 5. We got some VR aspects. It's not a surprise that there's going to be a Resident Evil 4 PSVR version after they've done Resident Evil 7, 8 in VR as well. A little bit more with Avatar, which we knew about before. We get some good early looks at Ghost Runner 2 and Helldivers 2. We get some longer gameplay with Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Then we get a little bit of JRPG time with some DLC for Tales of Arise, and Hatakai Star Rail got a launch date for October. And there's going to be an open beta for the Foam Stars, the Splatoon-like game that is coming out from Square. That open beta is coming at the end of September. And then they end with Final Fantasy Rebirth, which is coming the second of the 3 Final Fantasy VII remakes, which is coming in February, I believe. So I think that was most of what was there. But anything there, gentlemen, that surprised you, stuck out to you, excited you, things like that?
Nothing for me, just because I don't have PlayStation. But I mean, Spider-Man looks really impressive, though. I mean, if I had a PlayStation, definitely would jump on that.
I was impressed with the visuals of Spider-Man. That it really looked, after playing both the remastered one on PlayStation 5, playing Miles Morales, which already look amazing. This looked really, really great. So, which isn't a surprise given it's Insomniac and their kind of technical chops and their awareness of the PlayStation's hardware. Again, that it's a good sign for that game coming out in October. Game Logic?
For me, the hit list was Ghostbusters: Rise of the Ghost Lord. I thought looked really good and interesting. Again, not something I'm personally going to play because I'm not buying PSVR 2. But I thought it was an interesting, IP jump.
Yes, right. A great use of the IP. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Resident Evil 4 Separate Ways DLC. I thought that was a good announcement. Might play that. I'm not sure. I do have Resident Evil 4 Remake on PlayStation 5, so maybe.
So that's an Ada Wong kind of parallel story that's coming, which is great.
The big news of the state of play for me was Avatar and Spider-Man 2, and quite frankly, I don't know that I needed anything else out of this. Like that, those two to me sucked all the air out of the room. And a friend of mine, mentioned, understand that Avatar is, Far Cry 5 with blue people, and I am totally, completely okay with that. Spent tons of time in Far Cry 5. Still go back to Far Cry 5. Love the game. Again, very much like that piece of the game is in Starfield, right? When I talk about the metas and the mini games, the outpost raids in Starfield is the most interesting part of the game that I like. And it goes from starting, with an outpost raid and then takes you into being a corridor shooter, which is the thing that Far Cry 5 doesn't do. But I am all for, look, just give me a big map with 5 territories. Let it be open world. Let me choose how I want to go about taking those things down. And I will play that for a significant chunk of time. But as we see in the pre-release footage of Avatar, right, you're gonna have what looks to be like totally airborne levels up, at very high altitudes with the beasts. I'm not an Avatar lore guy, so I don't know what those things are called. But you're gonna have levels like that, and then you're gonna have ground levels and water levels and things. So super interested in that game. Spider-Man 2. Listened to a little bit of the Kind of Funny Games Daily guys who got to go hands-on and spend some time with that game. Hearing some very interesting things about like how the story is really integrated in terms of, with the approach to comic books and some of this other content, like, I think it was a good point that they brought up, very rarely do we, like Peter has his world and Miles has their world. And very rarely do we really get to see a lot of interoperability, right, between the characters. Right? Maybe we get some cameos, right? But and maybe we get we've seen a little bit of that in kind of the CW shows, like when Arrow would show up on the Flash, and you would see
we get the occasional crossover, but for the most part, they kind of exist in parallel spaces.
Yeah. But the most interesting parts of the CW is when like those characters, they didn't just work together. But then where some of them would actually have relationships and bonds with the characters in the other city, and you would see them go back and forth. And apparently, like, part of the storytelling in this is, we do see more of an intermix between, like, we see characters who have existed in the Marvel Universe for a very long time, but didn't really operate in conjunction or really spend a lot of time talking to each other. And we're getting to see, supposedly some of that in Spider-Man 2. And of course, there's the performance aspect that Insomniac, let drip in and around this, that they've implemented 3 different modes, all of them featuring ray tracing. So at no point did they feel like there was ever a need for them to back off ray tracing. One of the games I'm going to talk about tonight, right? I have been playing that game with ray tracing turned on, and it's amazingly performant, on PC. So hearing that they're going to be doing the same thing on console, it's I'm pretty stoked for.
Yeah, it just looks beautiful. Looks exciting. The other, I want to just hit a little bit on Final Fantasy Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, as somebody who's been plunking some time into Final Fantasy Ever Crisis on mobile, which released a week ago or so. Rebirth, or the pre-rendered cutscenes that it slammed at us all, it really threw a lot of fan service, but also a lot of questions out there as well. Like the fact that It's starting with Zach and Cloud both in a shared space, kind of hits at what the core of remake was, in terms of kind of redefining some of the canon and kind of opening up things for the next 2 rounds. So yes, we see a lot of familiar places and characters as we get Vincent and Katsith, but also the fact that we know that Zach is there and interacting with people means that from a storytelling perspective, things are not necessarily going to be playing out the same way as the original game, which is a nice kind of nod to get that out there for fans to kind of both in terms of speculation and creating some buzz, but also from a storytelling development side to say, hey, we are kind of planting this flag. It's going to be different, and we're not going to tell you how it's going to be different, but know that we are living in a different world than the one that you've played through over the years. Any other final thoughts on the Sony State of Play? All right. Well, let's move into our final. Let's turn the corner here as we've talked about some racing games. As we head into the final stretch of the podcast, we've got a couple of other games that we've been playing over the course of this week. We'll hit those and then wrap things up for the week. So I will just briefly say one of the other kind of side announcements that came from both the Nintendo Direct and the Sony State of Play was that there were, within Square Enix, there was a demo for Star Ocean: The Second Story R, which is coming out this fall, coming out in October. So there's a demo out now. This is the remake of the second Star Ocean game. I played the demo. Demo gives you a 3-hour time limit, but your save carries over to the full game. I think I've only played some of the demo. I've not expired my full 3 hours playing it on PlayStation 5. It's a fun little classic JRPG, but the stylistic choice, I think, is what really struck me, and why I just want to mention it here is that the characters are kind of 3D sprite based, like a Octopath Traveler, but they live in this world that is high res polygons that looks like it's running on a PlayStation 5. It's, grass looks great. The landscape is all 3D. It looks like a modern game. And then you have these high res pixels kind of running through this 3-dimensional space. And so it's an odd juxtaposition, but what I found with my time is that it also has a lot of charm to it, that it calls you back to that time of a 16-bit, early 32-bit story, and gameplay, but also kind of puts you in a world that's certainly a lot easier to look at. So that's Star Ocean: The Second Story R, which is a demo that's out now on PlayStation, Switch, and PC. Game Logic, you mentioned you've been playing some. Well, you alluded to that you were playing some Insomniac, which made me think must be some Spider-Man. But what's Spider-Man, and what got you to pick it back up? I know you've been playing it on and off over the years. So which Spider-Man looks like Miles Morales?
Yeah, so I did. Like I said, Starfield. One of the things Starfield has appealed to me to do is to go back and hit some of my games. Games that I love for the reasons that I love them, not games that we're obligated to play, or or zeitgeist games that we kind of feel like we have to spend some of our time in. So, one of the metas in the grind that I love is farming Spidey suits in Spider-Man. So I actually reinstalled this game on a PC, and amazingly enough, I don't know, maybe it was lucky, maybe it was not. It depends on your perspective. For whatever reason, my cloud save through the Epic Game Store wasn't there, and so I kind of picked the game up and I'm starting over, which I'm fine with. This is one of those games that way back in the day, like I probably would have played the beginning, 5 times, right, and only finished it like once and a half. But I'm starting that grind through hunting down enough stuff and playing enough side missions to get into the Spidey suits. And it's just a wonderful game. The fluidity of the combat, which sometimes is a weapon for you, like just in terms of like you can you can get yourself twisted in knots, right? With Spider-Man, like, not really sticking the landing with some of his hits, just throwing punches in the air. If you're throwing them like aerially, away, too far away from an enemy for him to kind of target and auto detect. I noticed one thing today that I hadn't even discussed before, but or even thought of before, but Miles, I think Spider-Man does a suit. They keep track of targets, from a camera perspective, uh, which I felt like to me is starkly different than a Souls game, right? One of the things that I constantly dork up in a Souls game is I get into combat, I get excited because I'm scared, because I know I'm going to lose, and I forget to hit the R3 button, right, to target, right, the enemy, and so the camera's not stuck, locked on them. But in Spider-Man, they do that on their own, right? So you don't have to be bothered with it. So, um, you know, uh, so I, just a beautiful game through and through. Lots of the cutscenes, right, really drive that story home. It's just a game that I love to play. And like I said, put it on PC today. I put it on a system with the 3080 Ti. Turn on ray tracing. Of course, I'm going through. I was live streaming it, so I'm going through a caption card, so it's capped at 60 frames per second. But I also know from having played on that system before that the game will scale up to 80, 90 frames per second. But it's capped at 60 frames per second, but it's capped at 60, but it's performing. It's locked in on 60 frames per second. Dips to 59 frames per second here and there. But but again with ray tracing on and everything kind of at high settings. So yeah, just a great game to play. Tao, one of these days we probably don't have time to do today. I know you don't have a PlayStation, but you do like gaming through the cloud, and this is a game that you could access via PlayStation Plus at whatever tier, I don't know. Like if you subscribe to it for like a month. Um, I've got questions. Like I think maybe I'm wondering if you're more. I think I'm trying to think back through the years, and I'm trying to think if I think maybe little things have trickled out that make me feel you're more of a DC guy than a Marvel, maybe. But this is a wonderful game in a comic book universe, and I always wonder. I mean, and you could play up. I mean, you could play on PC too at some point. So I mean, that might be a route you want to go. I feel like it's a game that I highly recommend. For a comic book fan.
Yeah, I would say I'm more of a Marvel guy. I do like. I mean, I always read both when I was reading comic books, but yeah, I'd probably say I'm more of a Marvel guy. But yeah, I mean, I could always. I do really want to play both of these games, but I just haven't had a chance to yet. So probably when there's some like combined sale, it's not too bad. I'll probably just pick them up.
All right. Game Logic, you also went back to Warframe. Some quick hits there as we're wrapping things up?
I did not too much to add, but again, prompted by Starfield to get back to games where I love the grind. I just never get tired of being a space ninja. The first time I went in, I just toe dipped. It was just kind of playing it the way the game told me to. The second time I went in and like read guides about like what is the sequence I should go through the missions. This time, I'm diving down to the third level, which is going in, seeing what sequence I should be doing the missions, reading a lot more of the data in the lore on like, hey, I'm stuck on this planet trying to get this gateway open. I'm seeing, okay, well, if you're going to solo this, you really need to be level 20. Okay, what are the specific mods and other things that you need, right, to really hit that thing and be able to take it down by yourself. So, digging into a greater level of detail in the game just because it's kind of caught my attention, even though it hasn't held it, for lengthy periods of time. But I'm spending that time this time around.
Yeah. Tao, we've got speaking of games that we've dipped in and out of. Looks like you've been playing a little bit of Ark again with your son. I know you've played that in the past. Just a matter of going back to your space, or are you guys tackling something different this time?
No, I just go not in original space, but we just went back to just to play in general. So we actually playing on a PvP server, which I didn't realize at first, and there's a problem.
That's a surprise to learn.
And the reason I couldn't get into this game at first is like, why can't I find the game you're in? And then eventually I figured out that he was playing on PvP. So I don't know why I picked that one, but I haven't seen anybody in the server yet. We've been playing the last couple nights, or all Saturday night, and then most of the day today. And I haven't seen anybody else come on the server, so hopefully it will be all right. But if not, we'll just start over. I'm sure we'll just jump over to a PvE server if it gets too much. But yeah. Just enjoying Ark as usual.
Nice. Well, good. And again, always good to play with family. That's a great way to spend that gaming time, is those shared experiences. Gentlemen, thanks for a great show. Good discussions as we're talking about both new potential things with PlayStation and Nintendo, and also kind of the challenges of the industry around Unity. Appreciate the insight and the discussion as always. Any final thoughts or final closing comments before we wrap up for the evening?
Yep. Just more
All
Starfield
right.
and F-Zero.
That's
for the
right. We
coming
got
week.
plenty of stuff to keep us gaming, which is great, which is what we will do. And we will be back again next week to talk about all that we've been playing and what's been going on in the news this week as well. And we hope that you will join us, whether you're joining us live or that you will jump in and listen to us and view us throughout the week. But for myself, DBQ Hams, Game Logic, and Towmaster99, this has been episode 308 of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. So until next week, play the games you love those you play with, and be kind to each other. Good night, everybody.